Welcome, everyone. My name is Astara Zaworski. I'm the land management coordinator at Vermont Land Trust. I'm an AmeriCorps member here, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Thank you for joining us in this webinar with the Tackling Invasives Together, CISMAs in Vermont. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining. And if you're not familiar with Vermont Land Trust, we are a membership organization dedicated to protecting farmland, forest land, and community lands across the state. 11% of all the land in Vermont is protected under VLT easement. We are thrilled to be joined tonight by our wonderful representatives from each of the 5 CISMAs or CWMAs, which we'll describe more about what that means later. So I'm just gonna ask each of our representatives to introduce themselves, which CISMA they're from, and who they work for. So I'm going to pass it on first to Corey.
Hi everyone, I'm Corey Ross. I'm the district manager for the Windham County Natural Resources Conservation District, and I'm a partner on the Southeast Vermont CISMA. And I can pass it to Mary.
Thanks, Corey. Hi, Mary Russ. I work for the White River Partnership, a watershed group, and we're part of the Upper White River Cooperative Weed Management Association, CWMA. I'll pass it to Sarah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah. I work for the Upper Missisquoi Trout Rivers Wildland Scenic Committee and the Missisquoi River Basin Association. I am a representative of the Orleans County CISMA group, and I'll pass it to my colleague, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay. I am also with the Upper Missisquoi and Trout Rivers Wild and Scenic Committee and the Missisquoi River Basin Association, and a very happy member of the Orleans County CISMA. I'm going to pass it to Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I am a botanist with the Green Mountain National Forest, and I am a partner in, or we are a partner in the Battenkill CISMA, and I will pass it to Isabel.
Hi, I'm Isabel Bowman. I work for the Windham County Natural Resources Conservation District, and I'm part of the Southeastern Vermont CISMA. Pass it to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Klisch. I work for the Silvio Conti Refuge, and I am a member of the Upper Connecticut River CISMA as well as the Southeast Vermont CISMA. And I believe it's Peter who is left.
Right. Thanks, Rachel. I'm Peter Van Loan. I work for the Vermont Land Trust, and I am on the Battenkill Southeast and occasionally the Orleans County CISMAs. And pass it back to you, Astara.
Thanks so much, Peter, and thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. Before we begin, I just have a couple of reminders for Zoom basic, webinar basic reminders. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature below. It should be at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for me, if it's like a tech issue, go ahead and use the chat. But otherwise, if you have questions for any of our presenters, go ahead and use the Q&A. We will get to the questions at the end of all the presentations. So just letting you know that that will be happening at the end. If you'd like to have closed captions, please enable them yourself at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have any trouble with any of these things, go ahead and ask me in the chat and I can help you. All right, now I will turn it over to Peter to introduce the CISMAs. And I'm gonna do a little screen share.
Great. Thanks, Astara. I am so excited about this. Thank you all so much for coming. We've been talking about this for a number of years. It's really exciting to see over 70 people here. We don't have a lot of time with you, so I'm going to try to be pretty brief. First, I want to thank everyone who sent in a question that they'd like answered tonight. We got a lot of questions, and so we're going to do our best to try to answer them all. We may not get to them all, and you'll probably have a few questions after you hear the presentations. So we'll do our best, but if we don't get to your question, please ping us and we'll try to help you out. One of the goals tonight was to introduce you to the CISMAs and CWMAs around the state. You can see on this slide what the acronyms mean. You don't need to memorize them. All you need to know is that these are groups of private and public organizations and people from the public who have experience working with invasive plants and are bringing resources to landowners in specific geographies around Vermont. Now, after this webinar, you'll know of them, hopefully know more of them, and you can contact them for help if you're passionate about the issue. It would be, maybe you want to contact them and see if you want to become involved. I know that some of them are looking for new members of their steering committees. If you notice that there isn't one in your area and you want to remedy that, we'll be sending out a publication in our follow-up email that gives folks guidance on how to start one of these. On the next slide, we're going to see a map of where all these groups work from north to south. Star, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. There we go. From north to south, in the middle, in the dark blue, there's the Orleans County CISMA, which is obviously in Orleans County. And a little to the east of that is the Upper Connecticut River CISMA. Right in the middle of the state is Mary's group, the Upper White River CWMA. On the bottom left, the southwest there is the Battenkill CISMA operating in Bennington County, and the Southeast CISMA is working in Windham County. And with that, I'll pass it off to Lindsay White and Sarah Lund from the Orleans County CISMA.
Thanks, Peter. So the Orleans County CISMA here in Orleans County, far in the north part of the state, formed about 5 years ago, and we're a loose collection of organizations that do work on invasive plants. So, well, invasives of all kinds. So we support each other and get together and communicate with each other and talk about emerging invasives. And tonight we're going to be talking about a project that has been near and dear to the Missisquoi, the Missisquoi River Basin Association. And I'm going to turn it right over to Sarah because she's the lead on this project. She's going to be talking about some of the work that we've done with knotweed.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. Just to reiterate, my name is Sarah. I'm the field coordinator for the Missisquoi River Basin Association. We're a nonprofit that is located out of the Missisquoi River Basin. Our office is located in East Berkshire. If you're ever there, feel free to stop in. We'd love to talk to you about our rivers. I'm going to talk a little bit about our knockout knotweed program that we handle. Just start off, for anyone that hasn't had the pleasure of working or seeing Japanese knotweed in their life yet, it is an invasive in Vermont. It's actually in 42 of our 50 states. It came over here in the 1800s as a plant. It just traveled over here like, how plants do. And now it's pretty common along disturbed soils. It's a herbaceous perennial, so it's not a woody kind of plant. It also is there year round. The top right picture is a picture of knotweed just after it sprouts in June. It was taken in our North Troy plot. The bottom left picture are little spring shoots early in the spring. That was taken in Montgomery in April. The middle one is just after flowering, so that's around August time. And then on the bottom right is after the first frost is usually kind of like this dense thickets of dead foliage you'll see. So they form very dense strands, and they can grow over 10 feet tall. And the real problem is the rhizomes, which are the part of the plant that grow underneath the soil. And those can grow laterally very far, and they're viable for 10 years, making it a very difficult plant to get rid of. And also spreads very easily. Any part of that plant that breaks off or any of the soil that's contaminated can spread knotweed pretty easily. And this is just a cover of why we care about it. So the Missisquoi River, unfortunately, has a pretty bad problem with Japanese knotweed. All of these pictures are along the bank of the Missisquoi River. The one thing that it does that all invasives do is that it immediately outcompetes natives because it grows very tall, dense thickets that overshadow any of our native populations. So the top left picture there was an unstable bank. You kind of see it, drew a little red circle on it. That is a knotweed stand that has unfortunately caused a bunch of erosion. The right top one is another bank that is causing incision line from erosion from a stand of knotweed, which eventually from the soil erosion leads to bank destabilization, which eventually impacts our water quality. And the bottom picture is just an example of our flooding recently that we had in July. The left bottom picture is a treatment plot that we've been treating in East Berkshire for a little bit. That was that picture was taken before we started any treatment or doing anything. And we just ended up doing some treatments with some interns that we had. And the right photo is unfortunately after the flooding that happened. And we lost a bunch of native plants that we had planted there. But that's just an example of just how the bank can erode so fast just from these big high water events. And just to talk an overall method, so our knockout knotweed program, the main reason that we started it was to find the most effective method of removal mechanically that's cost effective and easiest for landowners. It's very difficult to find herbicide treatment that is affordable, especially for people within the Missisquoi River Basin. So our idea for starting this project in 2020 was to find the best method that mechanically is easy for people to do. So we started with 5 treatment methods on 8-foot by 10-foot plots that we start setting up in the spring. The 3 methods that we still do, we smother with pond liner, a thick pond liner plastic. We cut monthly, and then we also have a metal mesh system, which we lay a layer of metal mesh. And I'll go into each of these more as we go through the presentation. And just to map out, so we do this on public land at a Riverwalk Park in Montgomery, and then we have another private landowner in North Troy that allows us to go onto his property to operate there. So that's how our original setup was set on that top left picture. The right picture is a monthly cut plot at Riverwalk. Bottom left is a metal mesh plot, and then the bottom right is a pond liner plot at Riverwalk. And then just to go over those 2 methods that we don't do anymore, we were comparing weekly and monthly cutting. We found that the labor was not worth it. Monthly cutting, it does the same effects generally when we're weighing them against each other. Another thing that we tried was cardboard and wood chips. Although it doesn't show it as much in the pictures, that there was actually a very heavy layer of cardboard underneath that wood chips. And I think like 3 truckloads of wood chips. There's a lot of wood chips on there. So our idea behind that was to see if there was a degradable substance that could weigh down the knotweed, and it did not work. So we did not do that. We do not do that anymore. So yeah. The metal mesh is one of those methods that we still do because there has been reports of it working in other places, like especially people in the UK that I've talked to, they have reported that it works well over there. Mostly in small emerging plots, as with most mechanical methods. I just want to put that out there, that most of these methods are the most effective in emerging plots of knotweed, not already established plots. The metal mesh method is where we use 1/2 inch metal mesh that we put around 5 to 10 inches above the ground. The point of it is to make the plant grow through these little squares and girdle the plant and cause it to die. So this top left photo up here shows what is supposed to happen with the knotweed. However, in our practice, we find that it's very unreliable. It's hard to keep it at the right height. Even if you have the right mesh that's galvanized, it can still wear out very easily. That bottom right picture was just 1 year of one of our mesh sites that we had to remove. The top right picture is one of our mesh sites that we see doing comparatively well, but you can still see there's still plenty of healthy shoots growing through the middle of it. So it's not one of our most recommended methods, but we're still tracking it. The next big one that we see the most effectiveness is pond liner. The pros of this is just leaving it be. The cons of that is leaving it be means if there's high volumes of water, which usually is on riverbanks, you likely will have troubles keeping that pond liner in place. So during the flood flood for us, we lost both of our pond liner plots, and we noticed that there was new shoots about weeks after we had lost those pond liner plots. And the other negative about this is that it also kills all vegetation underneath. So if you are trying to treat a bank and keeping sediment there, you will have to knock out all of the vegetation with this method. So this is just another, it's our most successful method so far, but it definitely has its negatives too. I'm just going to quickly go over disposal for our program. So we cut all of our knotweed at the end of the year. And our first year trials, we used to shove them into onion produce bags, which you can see in this bottom left hand picture. That was very cumbersome, as you can imagine, if you're cutting a 10-foot by 8-foot plot of knotweed and shoving them into a giant or a tiny bag with little mesh holes. So if you are going into a bigger composting pile, we have created a pallet box this year, which is the bottom two pictures. That's helped a lot with composting. We've actually seen it compost from last year's, which is our ultimate goal with knotweed removal. Another thing is just for burning knotweed, we have a little event I want to shout out. If you're ever interested in coming up to Montgomery, yearly we do a knockout knotweed bonfire at Riverwalk Park, and we burn some of our collected knotweed that's completely dried out and it can't spread anymore. And yeah. And if you have any contacts about knotweed stuff, I can talk about knotweed all day, any day. If you have any questions, you want to find a herbicide applicator, we can talk about chemical versus mechanical removal, stuff like that. But that is knockout knotweed, and I'll pass it off to the next one.
Thanks, Sarah and Lindsay. I think next up, we're going to hear from Mary Russ from the Upper White River Cooperative Weed Management Association. Take it away, Mary.
Thanks, Peter. Hi again, my name is Mary Russ. I'm the executive director of a watershed group called White River Partnership. We work in the White River watershed in East Central Vermont, draining to the Connecticut River. And we are part of the Upper White River Cooperative Weed Management Association. So, next slide, please. Just a picture here of our service area. It's in the headwaters of the White, so in the Green Mountain National Forest, primarily the Route 100 corridor, in the towns of Granville, Hancock, Rochester, Pittsfield, and Stockbridge. And the two CWMA formal partners are the Forest Service and my organization, but we have lots of other folks who work with us, including the towns, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and others. Next slide, please. So we focus primarily on terrestrial plant control. Here's another picture of Japanese knotweed with a nod to Sarah's presentation. And I've included a list of those species on the right. And in terms of what we do, we've conducted surveys of all the roads and trails in the watershed. We've tried to control small infestations. There's something called early detection rapid response, where you can hopefully knock out a small infestation before it spreads to something like this picture. And we've also engaged volunteers in controlling the invasives that can be managed manually. And I'll tell you about one example of that next. So this is a picture of a trail from the Rochester School up to the sidewalk on Route 100. An easy cut through for the kids going home after school. And as you can see, when we started this project, garlic mustard was on either side of the trail. So a really nice transport vector for those hundreds or thousands of seeds from each plant. There's a blow up of what a garlic mustard plant looks like if you're not familiar. It's actually an edible, it's a garden escapee, and it's really good at taking over the understory of forests and then suppressing growth of saplings. And really just outcompeting anything else that might grow there. So our goal was to, as a fairly discrete infestation, we thought it would be a great place to engage volunteers because it's not a plant that will burn you or cut you in any way. It's got a very small root if you can get it out. So the goal was to control the garlic mustard with volunteers, bag it, and see if we could keep the seed transport vector from becoming a thing in the rest of the town of Rochester. So what worked? The this is a great plant to pull manually in the spring, which coincided really nicely with the school schedule. And we had the Rochester School right next door. And so the students would come out as part of science class and pull the plants as part of science. And it was a really nice community effort. We'd also have weekend work days with folks. So it's a good plant to work with volunteers. It's actually a very effective to remove the plant if you can do it multiple years, so you get the seed source as well. And we had the Green Mountain National Forest headquarters is just down the road, and they have a big compost pile. So we had the volunteers, we had the right method, and we had the right disposal method right down the street. But what didn't work was the infestation was larger than we could control. And while we were successful at clearing it away from the trail, unfortunately, what that meant is that we basically released the wild chervil infestation that was on the edges of the parking lot. And so as we removed the garlic mustard, the wild chervil came in. And for those of you familiar with that plant, it will burn you. The sap of the plant can burn your skin. And so we were not able to then successfully keep seeds off of the trail through a purely manual control effort with volunteers. So what did we learn? So here's some elements of what we do now. So we do look for volunteer control projects where you have a discrete infestation, a control area where you know you can get to the plants that you're focused on, where the manual control is safe. So that really has to do with the plants. And where your goal is achievable, like you're preventing the spread of seeds versus eradication. Certainly works well with volunteers, especially if you can get folks to come at the right time to pull the plants. And really having a disposal site is key. So we learned a lot from the Rochester Control Project that we're now applying to other volunteer control projects in our service area. And I'll wrap up by saying happy to have folks reach out if they're interested in learning more. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mary. That's really great that you shared what worked and what didn't. And I think the point you make about, tackling something with volunteers that's achievable is a really important one. Helps keep people motivated. So next, we're going to hear from Melissa Green, representing the Bat and Kill CISMA. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. So the Bat and Kill CISMA is, as you can see here from these graphics, a partnership with a lot of various partners. I happen to be the representative from the Forest Service, so I also cover dealing with invasive species all over the forest. And I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time with questions. But today I wanted to talk to you about a particular project that's a little bit different than just invasive species management, because we also did some native replanting. So if you could go to the next slide, Astara. Thank you. So this is a discrete portion of forest land that is just southwest of Manchester, Vermont. It was something that had been hayed in the past, or a cornfield. The Forest Service had acquired it a while back and maintained. You can see sort of the portion that's overlaid in a shaded green is the portion that we're talking about, and running along the left-hand side and then zigzagging down is the Bat and Kill itself. That sort of rounded portion in the middle is a buttonbush swamp. So it had this huge mix of habitats. It was maintained by mowing, burning, maintained as a wildlife opening. But it also had some really interesting characteristics. So next slide. So the vegetation that we could see there indicated that it would normally be, or, prior to human alteration, it would be a sugar maple, ostrich fern, riverine forest. And we wanted to restore that forest community as much as we could. It also had all of these really cool plants and animals. It had 4 species of rare plants. So great blue lobelia and a meadow spike moss, butternut trees, switchgrass, also wood turtle and Jefferson salamander. And then that buttonbush swamp that I mentioned is also state ranked as uncommon. So this mapping that you can see underneath here, just the pink and the yellow are various locations of rare plants and animals. But the other thing was that it was also considered to be high potential for an archaeology, like a prehistoric archaeology site, which means that there's a lot of stuff all happening at once. So if you could go to the next slide, Astara. We had all of these invasive plants, and you can see that they're kind of in the same area as some of our rare plants and some of the potential archaeology sites. So it was a huge mess. And normally we would not even consider trying to restore a site like this because we might never succeed. But because of the rare plants and the animals in the natural community, we thought it was important to try. So we decided to chunk it up. And then if you could go to the next slide, please. The first step was removing invasive plants. So we started in 2018 with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. Now, those two pictures on the top, you might not recognize it from left to right, but it really is the same spot before and after. So because of the archaeological importance of this site, we could not do any digging whatsoever. So the plan was to, most of these things were like really giant honeysuckles, and the plan was to cut them and then do a cut stump herbicide treatment. But of course, as you might be able to see from the picture, the weather totally didn't cooperate. So what they had to do was they cut and piled them, and then they burned the, we had our fire crew burn the piles. And then eventually we did have contractors come and spray the regrowth coming from the stumps of the honeysuckles. So contractors and staff and partners have done more work after that. And in total, about 3 years of invasive plant control have occurred. And we can see the native vegetation starting to come back. Next slide, please. So what we did was Forest Service staff and the partners and Burn Burton Academy all helped to collect seeds of the woody species on site, which is really cool because a lot of times when you're trying to replant with native plants, you do not have an actual like locally native seed source. And then we were lucky enough to have Hildine grow out the seedlings for us at their nursery, and you can see them in that top right picture. And so the yellow kind of rectangle on the left was our first planting site. We are sticking to planting in the floodplain at this point. And let's see, next page. We planted buttonbush, red elderberry, witch hazel, ninebark, silky dogwood, red pine, and sycamore. And then the next slide will tell you what it looks like. So we planted about 175 to 200 plants. And what you'll see is that the orange things in the picture are vole guards. And then there's also the taller stuff is deer fencing. We have fiberglass stakes for support. We have weed mats, and we will be mowing around that. Next slide. So the next thing we need to deal with is the open area and the buttonbush swamp, which is heavily infested, but we're starting with the floodplain to see how that goes. And we're not kidding ourselves that we have a lot of work to do left with the invasive plants, but we really find that planting natives after you remove an invasive can help with that effect that Mary described, which we've seen all too often, which is having more invasive plants come into the hole that you just created. And lastly, this really isn't possible without a lot of partnerships, and it's the way to go. So thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Great to hear about your work and replanting with hyper-local plants. That is very cool. We're now going to hear about some exciting early detection and rapid response work and watershed level mapping of invasives being done by the Southeast CISMA. So Corey and Isabel, take it away.
Thanks, Peter. We are going to cover, as Peter said, an early detection rapid response. And this image here is of stiltgrass, which is going to be mainly what we're discussing. So the Southeast CISMA was established in 2019. Like the other CISMAs, we have a variety of partners, and our contact information's here, but you'll also, as I said before, you'll get that later on. And so for the plant we're talking about, it is called stiltgrass. Each plant can produce up to 1,000 seeds annually, so it forms basically a dense carpet. It's of most concern in forest floors where it just sort of takes over. And it's very small. You can see in the pictures, there's, hand-sized. It can get larger if it's not controlled, but that's pretty rare. And it's highly mobile. So the reason it's called stiltgrass is if you look at the picture of the hand, you can sort of see where the roots look like stilts. And some people say it basically just walks on land and over rocks to get where it wants to be. So it really likes to travel. And the seeds stay viable in the soil for up to 5 years. So it's really important to focus on the seed bank when we're talking about projects after you remove this plant. And for management, there's what we've been doing has been pulling. You can also cut this at the ground level with weed whack and flame, and ideally you would have removed them in late August. And so I also want to point out a few ID tips because this is a species that is new to Vermont. And if you look at the bottommost picture, you can see there's a sort of bright silvery stripe on the leaf, and that is something you can usually see in July and later on. And so that's a pretty good way to identify it. In addition, the name stiltgrass, those roots aren't as common. When you pull up other grasses, you usually don't see stilt-like roots. And the picture in the middle has a boot, and then it's hard to see on my screen, but maybe you can see it a little better, but it has, when it's ready to drop its seed, it has these little white parts to it, so you can identify it that way. But I stress reaching out for identification help. It's hard to identify grasses, and we're always happy to help. So the project that we're talking about today was funded by the Silvio Conti National Wildlife Refuge. It was a 2-year project, and the objective was rapid response. So this graphic shows you what that means. On the x-axis, we have time, and the y-axis, we have area infested. So if you look at that first green section, when a plant is first introduced, it has not infested a large area, so you're able to hopefully, within a short time period, detect it and control the habitat or control the spread. But the longer you go without working on the area and removing the plant, the larger the infestation gets. So that's why we wanted to do a rapid response project. And the idea was to take an inventory of Windham County, and we did this through outreach. So we had someone in the community who was really passionate about stiltgrass and made a lot of connections in her community, and she sort of spearheaded the project. And we then did some workshops and different site visits with landowners in order to spread the word about this plant and make sure we could map all of the infestations. So the outcomes, we created a report, which you can see here. It's also on our website of where we found stiltgrass and what removal tactics we used. And then we did some mapping, which Corey will talk about in a second, but we already knew of 3 sites. And with our mapping effort, we identified 4 new sites. So unfortunately, it does appear that it is moving, but we were able to on-site remove a good portion of what we saw this summer. We're hoping to do this again, or we are planning to do this again this coming season. And then we also installed a boot brush station at a trailhead, and this trailhead is very popular. It's used often in Brattleboro, and it's right across the street from an infestation. So the goal is that people will not carry this plant that's highly viable, the seeds are highly viable, into the forest area that's right across the street. And we plan to have more of those installed this summer. So I'll turn it over to Corey.
Thanks, Isabel. So I wanted to just briefly mention this because it kind of paired with that project. We were able to get a watershed grant from Vermont Fish and Wildlife to do some targeted outreach and mapping. And so we focused on one watershed because, as I'm sure you've noticed, the invasives problem is kind of overwhelming and they're everywhere. And we wanted to just maybe try to bite off something that felt achievable. So we picked the Whetstone Brook, which flows from Marlboro down into Brattleboro, where it joins the Connecticut River right downtown. So kind of a small size watershed that felt like we could tackle this. And our objective in this first phase of this, what we hope is a multi-year project, was to work with the public and to basically lead a community science project to map as much of the invasive infestations as we could in order to get a better understanding of where are these invasives, you know, what is maybe something we could manage, what is something that, you know, could be eradicated, and what is something that can't. I think next slide has some more stuff. We sent postcards out to all the landowners inside the watershed. We put on some workshops. We're lucky we had a lot of partners who were eager to be a part of this project, including the Conservation Commissions and the Vermont River Conservancy, of course, the Land Trust. And so then those postcards would explain to them how to get on iNaturalist, where we were collecting these observations, and how to make these observations themselves. Also offered them that we would be willing to send someone out to their property and help identify invasives on their property. And as you can see, we made 14 visits. So you can see we have no shortage of observations inside the watershed. You can also see that there are some big gaps in the map where where private land we couldn't access, and we didn't hear from those landowners. So we have applied for and have been awarded more funding for this second year from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And we're planning to kind of do more targeted outreach where the gaps in the map are, to try to better understand the current extent of invasive infestation. And we're also going to do some targeted outreach aimed at garden clubs, landscaping companies, road crews, people that we think play a role in the spread of invasives. So, and of course, this fit together really nicely with the stiltgrass work, because we could do both things a lot of times on the same visits and on the same public interactions. So that's just a quick overview of what we're able to accomplish this past year. Here is some information, and I'm going to pass this back to Ostara.
Thanks, Corey and Isabel. That education you're doing around stiltgrass is so important because it's a new one to Vermont and people don't recognize it. So thank you so much for that work. And the watershed mapping project looks like a really exciting one. Next, we're going to hear from Rachel Klisch from the Upper Connecticut CISMA. Sorry, Rachel, I don't seem to be able to speak while I'm introducing you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So the Upper Connecticut River CISMA was established in 2010, and it encompasses about 900,000 acres in Essex County, Vermont, and Coos County, New Hampshire. And it's a collaboration of natural resource professionals and volunteers. And the logos here on this slide show you who is current members of the CISMA. And we do rely on grant funding for all of our projects. Next slide. And since 2010, we've received 5 grants, and we've used these funds to conduct an invasive inventory of the CISMA. We've done some prioritization of what we want to manage and where. We've done a lot of community outreach and education. We've done some mechanical management, but we've really focused on some chemical treatments. Next slide. So far, we've identified just over 2,000 different invasive plant populations. Many of them are on the main stem of the Connecticut River floodplain, and therefore we've prioritized the floodplain as a priority treatment site. The majority of invasive plant populations are knotweed, Japanese knotweed. We are lucky in the Upper Connecticut CISMA to not have a lot of invasive plant infestations. And those invasives that we do have are fairly small in patch size. And so knotweed patch size is between 1 to 2 stems to about 5 acres in size. And because knotweed is in the floodplain and it spreads quite easily and can take over riparian habitat, we decided that knotweed is one of a focus for management. We will treat other early detection species as we come across them, such as bittersweet and garlic mustard, but we mainly focus on knotweed at this time. Next slide. So as I mentioned, knotweed is our priority within management within the Connecticut River floodplain. And our focus is from the headwaters south. So as we eradicate knotweed, we move south, we move further downstream. And we decided to use herbicides as our management technique. And so we are using grant funds. And so we've treated knotweed beginning in 2019. And we will continue, we've continued every year to 2024. So 2024, our grant funds run out, but we have managed to secure additional funding for 2025. We are working with 15 different landowners on both sides of the river, and we have 5-year agreements with these landowners. And the CISMA coordinates and we fund treatments. It takes about 2 days to complete treatments, 1 day by water, and then the rest from land. And the cost is about just under $2,000 per day. And since 2023, we've treated approximately 90 sites on the floodplain between New Hampshire and Vermont. And we have treated numerous other sites outside the floodplain, but within proximity to the river. Next slide. So at this time, all known populations have been treated at least once on 15 miles of river. That's an approximate mileage. We have seen excellent control, and we've eradicated about 20 plus patches of knotweed. This is an estimate. We know that we've eradicated at least 20. There are many patches where there is no longer any knotweed, and we just move downstream, but we haven't gone back to check to see if knotweed has come back. It's been a few years. So once we go back and we check, and there is no knotweed, then we consider that patch to be eradicated. So there's more likely more than 20 patches. And it usually takes between 2 to 3 treatments to eradicate the knotweed patch. So we have a few sites where the stunted knotweed, which tends to come up after you do an herbicide treatment, is persistent. It is not disappearing. So we have had success, of course, with treating stunted knotweed, but the larger patches, they just seem to stick around longer. And so with those patches, we're trying to decide what we should do at these patches, whether or not we just leave the site alone for 1 to 2 years, allow the knotweed to grow and have more surface area on the leaf for the herbicide to penetrate, or if we try pulling the stunted plants with volunteers. So I believe we're going to try and just leave it alone for 2 years and just see if that works. Next slide. So another project I just wanted to mention, because it's been a successful project, is in Lancaster, New Hampshire. So Lancaster, the Conservation Commission in Lancaster approached the CISMA and asked if we could treat knotweed in their town. And this was in 2022. And we feel this has been successful, mainly due to the town really taking ownership of the project. And there was one person in particular who is a lifelong resident of Lancaster who really took the initiative and moved the project forward. And so in the town, the Conservation Commission and volunteers, they collected knotweed location data that we did not have. They contacted landowners. They conducted community outreach in the town to advertise the project. And then once all of this data was collected, in 2022, the CISMA used grant funds and for treatments, and we coordinated treatments with the contractor. And in 2022, we decided to focus on town properties and the right-of-way. And this was mainly because this was visible to the community. And in 2023 and in 2024, the community really saw what we could do with knotweed. It was really knocked back in 2022. And so we got a lot of phone calls from community members who were interested in treatment on their properties. And the town voted to use $4,000 in 2023, and in 2024, $6,000 of their budget to help with treatments. And so we are also still helping with funding treatments and coordinating treatments. We actually combine the Connecticut River floodplain effort with the Lancaster effort, and this decreases the contractor costs for the town. And because of the success of this project, we are hoping to use this in other towns within the CISMA. Next slide. So I just wanted to end on this slide. This is just showing a visual of how the different scales that is used to manage knotweed or manage invasives in general. So we have the individual landowner scale, the multiple landowner scale, and the town scale. And each individual box within the larger box is a landowner boundary. And so at the individual landowner scale, this is a scale that's used most often. And this is when a landowner will contact a contractor, for example, to manage knotweed on their property, but the landowner does not reach out to adjacent landowners to see if they have knotweed on their property and whether or not they'd be interested in managing that invasive. And so what happens is the knotweed that's growing on the adjacent property just invades the property where the knotweed was managed. And I'd say that this is the least efficient for control and not as cost-effective way to manage invasives. And then at the multiple landowner scale, this is the scale that the CISMA is using with the Connecticut River Floodplain Project. The CISMA is coordinating this project, and we are the ones that contact landowners. This can be a successful model, but it is challenging for the CISMA to obtain landowner data, to convince landowners to work with us because they do not know us. So this can be very challenging. And then if we move to the town scale, this is an example of the Lancaster project, where the town is helping to coordinate, the community is educating, neighbors are educating neighbors. And this is where treatments become much more efficient. It is much more cost effective because you have adjacent lands that are being treated, and the knotweed is not, or an invasive is not coming back onto the properties that have been managed, if managed properly. And so this increases management success. Next slide. And so here's my contact information if anybody has questions.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. That's really great. I'm always so impressed by the work that you get done up there in the Upper Connecticut. It's really amazing. Thank you for that. So you can see here on this slide the contact information for everybody. I want to thank all the presenters so much for taking some time out of what turned out to be a pretty beautiful night where I am anyway. Thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom with everybody. If you don't get all this contact information typed out, don't worry, we will send it to you in a follow-up email. I got a couple of favors to ask of you. If you don't have a CISMA in your area and you're passionate, maybe think about starting one of your own. We will send you this cookbook on how to start your own. And I'd also like to ask that if you enjoyed the webinar, if you got something out of it, share it with some folks who you think might be interested as well. We're 89 people at the peak on this webinar, and that's great. But if we spread the word, even more people can get involved. And with that, I think I will turn it back to Astara, and then we'll do some question and answers.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody. I'm just going to, well, thank you for everyone for being here. And also I just want to mention that climate change and land fragmentation is one of the biggest reasons why invasives continue to thrive. And Vermont Land Trust continues to commit to conserving land and doing educational outreach to reduce the effects of climate change and help defragment wildlife habitat. much of our work is fueled by donations from the public. So please consider donating to VLT on our donation page, which is vlt.org/donate. And VLT is always putting on so many wonderful events. The CISMAs are also putting some events in the future as well. So make sure to check out some of our websites. But specifically with VLT, we will be putting on an evening with Beaverland author Leela Phillip, and that's at April 18th, 2024, 7 p.m. It's in person, and it is just a fantastic book, and it's really if you could make it, it's a wonderful event. Also, there's the Barry, I always mess that up. I'm not a Vermonter. I'm from New Hampshire. Barry Town Forest for an old pool walk. And that's April 30th, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. also in person. So check all of those events and more coming up at vlt.org/events. And then one more thing too, we're going to open up for questions in just a second, but there will be a survey at the end after this webinar is closed, and please fill out that survey. We really value your feedback. It helps us to bring educational events to you in the way that you want them to come to you. So we really value that, your feedback. All right.
Great, thank you, Astara. So we got a bunch of questions. Some of them have been answered already. It looks like the first one up here is someone looking for tips on autumn olive and glossy buckthorn control. Anybody want to take a stab at that one? If not, I can talk about what we did at the King Farm in Woodstock. We had goats that did a really great job on the autumn olive, even though it's got these massive thorns. They just loved it. And they were pygmy goats. We had fairly mature autumn olive, but they hammered it. They really took care of it. And the buckthorn is a little bit, I mean, I think with both of these, it depends a little bit on how mature they are. So if they're small ones, obviously you can hand pull them. If it's fairly mature stuff, then it's going to be harder to control. And if it's, say, over your head, it's not probably going to be practical to do a chemical application because you're going to be spraying up high and it's difficult to control overspray. So what we did when we had buckthorn like that is we mowed it first. We had a guy with a really heavy duty brush hog come and he mowed it. We let it regrow. He mowed it in the fall and then we let it regrow in the in the spring. And in the summertime, we did an herbicide application and that worked really well. We now have a beautiful field full of pollinator plants there. So that's a couple of things to consider. One thing, I think Astara's got the next question queued up, but one thing I'd like to say is I think a few of these questions are coming in on the chat and they're really hard to organize on the chat. So if you've put a question in the chat, please retype it into the Q&A so that we can answer it. Thanks. Looks like you're muted, Astara.
Thank you. Looks like we have a couple of people who are interested in expanding efforts in Windsor County. So I know that myself, Peter, and Corey and Isabel are in the southeast area, not specifically Windsor County, but Windham. So Kelly is asking if there's a way that we can seek local partners, conservation commissions, garden clubs, and youth groups, etc., to organically grow a CISMA there. So I can answer a part of that question, which is, we have the cookbook, which we will be sending out to you in the resources, has all the information that if someone is interested in starting a CISMA, where you can start. But I want to open it up to people who have been in the SISMA longer, for how they can get started, what the best first steps are.
So I think Kelly runs a group called the Black River Action Team in Springfield, and they are already doing some invasive plant work. And she is also now district manager for the local Natural Resource Conservation District. So hopefully she can use some of her seemingly boundless energy to help expand the CISMA work in Windsor County. Let's see. Do we have another question here? Someone noted that removing buckthorn with a weed wrench helps with smaller shrubs. Yep, that's certainly true. If you have, I think an important point that Mary made was about volunteers also applies to you when you're working on your own property. If you're gonna try to control something, pick something that's relatively achievable. If you have acres and acres of buckthorn, trying to pull all those with your arms or with a weed wrench is going to be really hard, and you're probably going to get frustrated and quit. And try to pick something, an area maybe that has just a few invasives, and start with that. And also try to, I think, pair your invasives work with your goals. So if you're trying to improve a certain area for whatever use, whether it's timber management or you want to put a recreational trail through, concentrate on that area and making progress on that so that you can achieve your goal. I think it's important to have achievable goals, both when working on our own properties and when working with volunteers. Have you got another question queued up for us, Astara?
Garrett asks, have you heard of anybody planting trees into knotweed patches? I set some walnut saplings into one of the patches on my property to mow or otherwise suppress the knotweed around them. So maybe some of our knotweed presenters can answer that question.
Yeah, that's actually one of, well, our goals. So that one picture I showed you with the flooded knotweed bank of the side by side, the treatment I talked about, but I didn't have enough time to go into, was that we planted some natives there that we were cutting around. So some of the natives we planted were some black walnuts, some raspberries, some rhododendrons, I think some other, like maybe a silver maple or something like that. And that spot is also under a canopy of silver maples, so it's kind of like a unique area. We did see the black walnut actually survived, and the rhododendron did great. The raspberries were growing, and they all unfortunately got removed from the flood. But that is, personally, as someone who's been doing this for about 3 years now, I think that's going to be our end goal with the project, is finding a way to introduce those woody species like a silver maple, for example, and then treating the knotweed around it.
Another person asked how the chemical treatment of knotweed is applied. So maybe while we're on knotweed, maybe we can answer that question as well.
Yeah, maybe if Rachel wants to go into how they did it in their project.
Yeah, so we treated knotweed with backpack sprayers mainly, and then also from a truck by land. And we used glyphosate, which is an approved glyphosate. Sorry, you can use glyphosate that's approved for treatment near water, and that's what we used.
Folks, we know that it's past 8 o'clock, so our webinar was supposed to end at 8 o'clock. We're willing to stay on for a few minutes longer to answer questions. But if you do need to leave, you're welcome to access this webinar on YouTube and our YouTube channel, well, Vermont Land Trust YouTube channel. So thank you for coming. If you want to stay longer, please do. We're going to get to the rest of these questions. Peter, do you want to ask a question?
Sure, yeah, we've got one from Kate who wants to know if it's possible to plant a fire break for wild chervil to keep it from spreading into a field from neighboring properties. You got an answer for this one, Mary, you think?
I guess depending on how wide your fire break was, that could be successful. I will mention we did an administrative study with V-Trans to try to test different techniques for wild chervil management, mowing, herbicide application on really established infestations along Route 100, and pretty much nothing was successful. So I would ask the question, like, how big is the infestation that's encroaching on your land? And then I'll say from a personal standpoint, I bought something called a parsnip predator, which is a tool that was developed to get rid of wild parsnip, which is in the same family as wild chervil. And I am managing my neighbor's infestation to try to keep it from coming up my road. And that's been the best tool that we've found after many, many, many years of using it. So check that out, parsnip predator. It's a hand tool and it's really effective. So.
Yeah, and I would add that I've seen it creeping under trees and into forests, so I don't think that planting a fire break would unfortunately be as effective as you would want it to be. You'd probably just end up digging around under the trees.
Seems like there's a couple of questions about pesticide use and what it takes to get a pesticide applicator license. I know, Rachel, you're answering that question right now. But also another person has asked what glyphosate is approved for use by water. So those of you who have experience with the pesticide application, you're welcome to answer.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So so I sent a text with a link to the Vermont Department of Agriculture, which is where you can get training for Vermont pesticide license. So I would go there first. And in order to use, I believe, in order to use a glyphosate that's aquatic certified, you have to have a pesticide license. And I believe it only a commercial applicator can use that. I'm not positive on that. So I would look into contacting a contractor to ask that specific question. And then I saw another question from Joel about a landowner applying general use herbicide to their own knotweed, and that is fine as long as you own the property. And it's an herbicide you can buy from a store, like a hardware store or something.
Thanks, Rachel. Another thing to remember if you're applying herbicides on your own property is that while it may be legal, it's legal to the point of you following what's on the label. So you can't just take it and start spraying it around. There are very specific instructions on how much you can use per acre and when you can use it and that sort of thing. The label is the law, as they say. So make sure you read all of that label before you start using it. And if you have a big infestation, I always just encourage people to hire a professional who does it all the time because they'll probably end up using less. We have a question from Danielle. Does anybody know anything about something called yellow archangel? She thinks it's an ornamental plant planted by the former owner and has gone crazy. You know anything about that plant, Mel?
No, I was just going to Google it before you called on me.
Sorry about that.
A Latin name would help, but I will look it up and I'll say something if I can find anything.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So somebody wants to know what CISMA covers the Medowee. So the Medowee is real close to the Battenkill, as you know, Michael, and so we have helped some folks and given some folks in the Medowee some advice, some resources. So if you have an issue you're struggling with, definitely get in touch with the Bat and Kill folks, and we'll see if we can help you out.
I'm wondering if we had asked about, did we ask the question around yellow archangel? We did, okay. It's that one.
Yeah, and I just Googled it. It does not appear to be much of a presence locally, but it is listed as an invasive on other websites like out west. And so it seems like this could be an early detection, rapid response type of situation, which is like one of the most important times to control something before it becomes widespread. You know, while we might not know about that particular species, there's a lot of resources online, and it could be something that you might want to take care of.
Thank you, Mel.
Yeah, and sorry, I think I'm interrupting somebody who.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, on that point of early detection plants, it's really great to get them mapped. And if you go to the VT Invasives website, on every page, there's this little button that says report it. And if you find something that's unusual, hit that report it button and fill out the form, give them a location of where it is and a photograph. And in all likelihood, someone will be in touch with you. Another thing you can do is use the iNaturalist app. I don't know if folks are familiar with that. The Southeast group has been using it for the project that Corey was describing. And if you use iNaturalist, you can enter the plant there. If it's in one of the CISMA areas that's doing work on mapping things in their area, it'll pop into their iNaturalist project as well. I know the Bat and Kill and the Southeast have those projects going. So it would be great to get it on a map somewhere so we know where it is.
And I'll pipe in that the Southeast CISMA on the website does have a like how to. So if you've never used iNaturalist, it's a great way to learn. And we describe through app or through online. So whatever tool you're able to use.
Definitely. Thanks for that. I see another question from Sue, who's asking if we can get a list of good contractors. I will be sending out a list of Vermont contractors for invasive species management. And we're going to compile all the lists that we know of so far as a group to send to you.
There's another question from Bernie, wondering if anyone has had success with repeated cutting of honeysuckle to control it without using herbicides.
Just on a personal level, whenever I'm hiking and I see honeysuckle, I'm one of those people that grabs it and hangs it up to dry. So that is a classic technique if you know how to identify invasive versus non-invasive. I also just wanted to point this out. There's been a couple of questions about just some resources for people about invasives. A great resource is just vtinvasives.org. If you just are like those questions about buckthorn, the page on VT Invasives will tell you how to identify it, where it's usually found, what typical management strategies there are. So that's a great resource for people to use too. Star can send that out as well with her or their contact information.
Thanks, Sarah. That's a great point.
I don't know if I see any more questions. Peter, do you? Or anybody else? Or any last words that we want to share with our group here?
Star, I just, there've been a couple folks saying where are the CISMAs and is there a CISMA in my area? So maybe send out that map as an individual JPEG too, just so folks can really see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to mention that for folks, if you are not in the county of where a CISMA is located at this point. If you can reach out to your closest CISMA for support. We are always welcome to support you and help you in any way that we can. That's what we're here for. So just because we're not in your county doesn't mean we're not here to help. So I think I can speak for everyone on that one. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you again to all the panelists for their contributions tonight. It was really great.
Thanks everyone for coming. We'll be sending out some resources as I've said before, and also the link for where you can find this video or this webinar. If you want to share it with other people, please share it with as many people as you can. And we're going to send out the Q&A for the answers that we have and send those to you as well. So thanks everyone for coming. I hope you have a good night.